Hello and welcome. I am politically motivated and I hope that you are too. My aim with this channel is not to enforce my political views on you, but to share them with you, along with my reasoning, in the hope that other like minded people can start a respectful and educational political debate, regardless of their standpoint. To be clear, I am anti woke, anti dictator, and anti hate. And in my experience, woke activists tick all three of those boxes. There are far too many people with access to a keyboard who seem incapable of such respectful discourse, and their comments will be removed immediately, and the writer consequently banned. So do keep a civil tongue. Please do feel free to share your thoughts and opinions along with your reasoning in the comments section below. Who knows? We might just help to fix this broken planet. This is part two of my analysis of the Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin interview, and I want to make it abundantly clear that I'm not being persuaded in any particular direction by watching it, but merely analysing the evidence that I see before me. The lack of freedom of speech and basic human rights atrocities that we've seen in Russia, not to mention the blatant lies regarding the military movements of Russian forces along the Ukrainian border, have not been forgotten. But in order to have a clear and concise understanding of the Ukrainian situation, it is essential to listen to and understand all sides of the argument. And this, well, it's a very complex 1,000-year-old argument, and it requires extensive research and comprehension. Now, I have done some much needed research on the topic since the last video, and I'm now actually starting to be more concerned that NATO is something of an untrustworthy organization, perhaps controlled by American military companies. My reasoning for this is that having once agreed to not move NATO 1 inch towards the east in return for the removal of all Russian troops and the Berlin Wall to be knocked down, thus allowing the reunification of East and West Germany, and then for Germany as a whole to join NATO, having made that promise, you might ask the question, why would NATO renege on that and start moving east, despite having promised not to do it? There is incredibly strong evidence to suggest that because each NATO country is forced to sign an agreement which ensures that they only buy American grade weapons, and I'm not sure if that's directly from America or from American approved locations. Either way, it's definitely American military weapons factories that control that section of NATO. So once again, it seems that it's the people behind the President of America who are actually calling the shots. And I swear to God, unless you're an idiot, you must be aware that they really don't care who has to die in order for them to get their piece of the pie. All they care about is themselves and the power that they have. They don't care about people and they don't care about the planet. Furthermore, and as Putin alluded to in part one, American financed organizations overthrew the elected Ukrainian government in 2014. That's not speculation, that has been acknowledged and proven. The conflict and the conflict in the pro-Russian area of Donbass region began as a result of that. Now, this movement had expenses that ran into the billions of dollars. I believe it's 5 billion, something like that. And American manipulation of the Ukrainian parliament continues to this day, even with the existing president. It's quite eye-opening to see, actually, that a lot of the information that I've been reading from all different sources, mostly Western sources, to be fair, really does paint a very different picture. Whereas Russia, which is in Western terms, has always been sort of promoted or sold to us as this big, scary, dangerous country, who are looking to take over the world. Well, to be honest with you, a lot of the information sort of suggests that they're not that big and scary, and they're not really doing all that much. Yes, they have nuclear weapons. Yes, Putin, I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. And yes, he's a politician. Is he going to tell the truth all the time? No, that's been proven. You have to be very, very careful with politicians. Fundamentally, what I've discovered is, and there's an awful lot of information to know, is that the key element in the Ukrainian conflict right now is Crimea. It's an area of land which has never known peace for any sustained period of time, except for the longest period of time when it was under Russian rule. But even that is sort of controversial. We've got many, many instances where people, different countries, have tried to take Crimea, and we've got the infamous charge of the Light Brigade, which is just one well-known instance where, if you don't know, British forces and her allies attempted to use that strategic placement of Crimea in the Black Sea in order to rescind Catherine the Great and the Russian Empire from expanding south. But in part one, Putin recited in excellent detail pretty much 1,000 years of Russian history in response to Tucker's question, why did you invade Ukraine? And I think that's relevant up to a point. It's good to understand the history, but you would be hard pressed to associate the many conflicts, treaties, and border modifications throughout the last 1,000 years to be in any way relevant to what is happening in Ukraine today. But some more recent history, and perhaps where he should have started, is in 1954, Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the USSR at the time, gave the then autonomous Crimea to Ukraine, or sorry, Ukrainian SSR, who at the time were under the umbrella of the Soviet Union. Now, what's controversial about that is that he seemingly did so without clear reasoning or permission from the Russian people, that is. Now, there are many theories as to why he did this, some of them heartfelt, some of them sinister, but nobody really knows for sure. What they weren't expecting, however, was that a short time later, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, thereby leaving Ukraine and Crimea outside of Russian control. And whatever the reasoning was for giving Crimea to Ukraine, I don't think they ever expected that to happen, to lose control of Ukraine and Crimea. Now, if we take the history into account, Ukraine asked to be placed under the protection of Mother Russia when they were getting invaded and treated badly by Poland. That is the story, the history behind it. But that was such a long time ago, and so many things have changed since then. It's very difficult. Now, in the years which followed after the collapse of the USSR, Ukraine slowly started to move ever closer to union with the EU and NATO. And in 2008 up to 2010, it looked very likely that they would join either one or both of those factions. But they ultimately decided to retain and strengthen Russian allegiance, which had catastrophic civil war responses. And they did this because the financial benefits of being close to Russia outweighed the financial benefits at that time with Europe and America. So what's changed all this is that when COVID hit in 2019, disrupted worldwide food production combined with the removal of years-old restrictions on the sale of Ukrainian farmland, Ukraine suddenly became a significant player on the world stage for sunflower oil, fruits and corn. And they weren't even doing a particularly good at producing those products. So the potential for money earned there is absolutely gargantuan. I missed out the point that Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, and they did that in response to the civil war issues that came about after the election was overthrown in 2014. So there's so much complex stuff that's gone on, and I guarantee you that your knee-jerk reaction before watching this documentary is that it's all to do with Russia. Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia bad. And, I'm not saying that Russia are not bad. They're certainly not the good guys. They don't behave necessarily in a way that we find acceptable in this day and age, but it certainly isn't all Russia. That's something that you do need to get out of your head. They have been provoked repeatedly. And whether or not that justifies the invasion of Ukraine, I think is still very much up for debate. The thing is, we've got an hour left of this interview, and I want to know many things, but I really want to know where Putin's head is. Um, Now, I understand that Ukraine suddenly became, because of the money they were making, producing all these food and selling it across the world, they became less dependent on Russia. Now, that is a big problem, partly because of the Black Sea Fleet, which is obviously located, I think, Sevastopol in Crimea. You know, this is the Russian naval fleet. They've also got a military base on Crimea as well. So, from a military perspective, you can understand why Russia would want to control that area. But I think it's more than that. I think it's partly, at least, to do with land control of Crimea. And I suspect that Russia wants to expand far enough so that they have more sort of right, if you will, to it. Um, so obviously, with Ukraine making lots and lots of money, that's piqued the interest of global megacorps from rich countries like America. It's driven the stock prices up significantly, which has detrimental effects on the defense of Russian economics, as I said. And that's the very same reliance which ultimately stopped Ukraine from joining NATO in 2010. So the problem is now that Zelensky has set up the Crimean platform, in which he has clarified that no negotiation without Crimea will be considered. So once again, it seems to be Crimea which is the sticking point of all of this. I suppose the argument would be that all of this corn and fruits and oil that Ukraine produce, they're going to struggle to get it out of their country if they don't have access to the Black Sea, if they don't have a port like Sevastopol that they can send stock to and from. So, whatever the reality is in these incidents and decisions, all of the decisions that have been made continue to be politically and militarily sensitive to everything which is happening in the East today. And it all seems to revolve around Crimea in one way or another. But we've still got many unanswered questions here. And only Tucker Carlson can answer the questions. And I haven't watched this yet, so it's going to be intriguing for me. I still want to know whether anyone other than Putin can rule Russia. And if so, how? Does it have to be with his explicit permission, i.e., only if he says, yes, that person is suitable, will they be allowed to do so? Exactly what is it that Russia want from Ukraine? He's talking about Nazism. He wants to denazify Ukraine, and he gave some very loose examples. All of that is incredibly questionable, I have to say. Admittedly, when they went to Canada and they were clapping and cheering a Nazi, yes, very questionable. He also made some statements about Poland and how they assisted with the Nazis, but generally it's considered that it was German, the small German population who were doing that. Although there are some arguments to suggest that once the Jews were sort of considered second-class citizens, that people were attacking them and taking them out and getting vengeance and things like that. So I mean that's a whole different story. But on the most part, it's now illegal actually to even suggest that Poland were pro-Nazi back in the day, and the way that Putin paints it is definitely not quite accurate, I don't think. So there's that to take into account. What will it take to end the war? And will they give back any of the ground that they've taken? I suspect that the answer to that will be absolutely not, especially Crimea. They want that, they want to keep that, and I think they want to keep all the land that links Russia to Crimea, because at the moment Crimea is not connected to Russian land. It's not a big distance, to be fair, but yeah, it is irrelevant and an argumentative point about who should own it correctly. And perhaps most importantly, is Putin a complete madman? I mean, is he? He's definitely intelligent. He's definitely more lucid than the likes of Biden. And we've seen Biden get attacked very strongly recently, according to his cognitive state and capability, and quite rightly so. It's about flipping time, to be fair. And I think if you put Putin up against Biden, Putin would beat him in every single department, physical, mental, capacity of any sort. So this is all very, very, very interesting stuff. Hopefully, we'll know the answer to at least some of these questions by the end of the video. But there's one thing that I think is abundantly true, and even if you are woke, you must admit you can never ever trust a politician 100% because they will lie to your face to benefit themselves. And you must bear that in mind, even when you're watching this video with Putin. There's no guarantee that what he's saying is the truth. You have to be a little bit speculative and do your own research and come to your own conclusions. I'm just sharing my thoughts and opinions on this, and I'm really interested to hear yours. So please do let me know in the comments below. Whew, okay, that's a hell of a long intro. Let's get on with the video.
Really, my question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so, I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism. But how? How do you do that?
Вот послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень тонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very
Можно я
subtle,
скажу, как я думаю?
and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Он, казалось бы, тонкий, он очень противный, этот вопрос.
This question appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky.
Значит,
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years,
люди, которые
80 years.
уничтожали
But his
евреев,
example
русских и
lives on.
поляков, живы.
People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and
Действующий
Poles are
президент
alive.
сегодняшней Украины
And the
аплодирует
president,
ему
the
в
current
канадском
president of
парламенте,
today's Ukraine,
аплодирует
applauds him
стоя.
in the Canadian parliament,
Разве мы
gives
можем
a
сказать, что
standing
мы
ovation.
целиком выкорчевали
Can we
эту
say that
идеологию,
we have
если
completely
то, что мы
uprooted
видим,
this
происходит
ideology
сегодня?
if what we see is
Вот что
happening
такое
today?
денацификация в нашем
That
понимании.
is what
Надо
denazification
избавиться от
is
тех
in
людей,
our
которые,
understanding.
эту
We have to get rid of those people who
теорию,
maintain
практику
this concept and support this
оставляют в
practice
жизни
and
и
try to
стараются
preserve it.
сохранить.
That
Вот
is
что
what
такое
denazification
денацификация.
is.
Вот
That
что мы под
is
этим
what we
понимаем.
mean.
Right. My question is a little more.
I think Tucker Carlson here, I'll criticise him a little bit. He should have pointed out that it was declared a couple of days after that incident that they were unaware of his Nazi ties. And, you know, all the people, I mean, they're like sheep, aren't they? All the people in there have been presented with this guy and they're being told that he's a national hero and they should applaud him. So they all stand up and applaud him. To be honest with you, probably 90% or more had no idea who the bloke was and they were just following suit. So I wish Tucker Carlson would have brought that up with him just to scrutinize him on that because you know he's kind of suggesting there that they knew he was a Nazi and they were celebrating his Nazism. That isn't the case. I don't believe, in my humble opinion. I have no proof of that, but I just don't believe that to be true. I wish Tucker Carlson would have pulled him up on that. But anyway, let's press on.
Specific. It was, of course, not a defense of Nazis, neo or otherwise. It was a practical question. You don't control the entire country. You don't control Kiev. You don't seem like you want to. So how do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control? What do you do about that?
А вы знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле,
You know, as strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations in Istanbul, we did agree that we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine, including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Mr. Carlson, we agreed on that. This, it turns out, can be done during the negotiation process. And there's nothing humiliating for Ukraine as a modern civilized state. Is any state allowed to promote Nazism? It is not, is it? That is it.
Ведь нет, правда? Вот и все.
Will there be talks, and why haven't there been talks about resolving the conflict in Ukraine? Peace talks.
Они были, они дошли до очень высокой стадии согласования позиций, сложно.
They have been. They reached a very high stage of coordination of positions in a complex process, but still they were almost finalized. But after we withdrew our troops from Kiev, as I have already said, the other side threw away all these agreements and obeyed the instructions of Western countries, European countries, and the United States to fight Russia to the bitter end.
I won't speak too much about this, but he's talking about the Istanbul, I believe, I think it was Istanbul agreements. There's two flavors of this agreement. The first one did not work out, and that's when I think Russia invaded for the first time. And the second one, which hasn't worked out, is kind of what led to the second invasion, I suppose. There's a lot of controversy from Western and Russian sources that say that basically the agreement that's been written is not definitive enough. It doesn't clearly state who does what, who gets what, when, and where. And this is the problem. They can't seem to. It all comes down to Crimea. It seems more than anything else. You know, it's who is going to get ownership of Crimea. And that seems to be the sticking point completely. As silly as that sounds, I mean, well, maybe it's not that silly. It's a military base, and it's a naval port. It is an important part. I think Ukraine have no military aspirations, but they have economic aspirations where access to the Black Sea is quite important. Whereas Russia, you could argue militarily, that is important to them. And they do feel like they're constantly on the defensive from American movement, obviously movement of NATO, the positioning of nuclear-based weapons in places like Poland, etc. These are things that have constantly stoked up the America versus Russia, Europe versus Russia sort of scenario, but it's very, very complex. And it certainly isn't all one-sided, but yeah. So this agreement is basically not definitive enough. So I don't see how this. I really genuinely don't see how this is ever going to get solved unless Zelensky or Putin are removed from their positions. And equally, I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen. America do have a hand, supposedly, in the Ukrainian politics, and that's not from Russian sources, that is from Western sources. This is a known thing. But do they want to get rid of Zelensky? Do they like the fact that Zelensky's there? Because the whole time that Russia are at war with Ukraine, weapons and ammo and stuff are being bought by NATO countries from American-owned weapons manufacturers. Do you see how it always seems to come back to who's making the money? The whole time there's a war going on here, it's beneficial to these countries, the people behind the president. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it is true. I mean, you don't have to put the conspiracy theory aspect to it. The fact that they're making money as NATO countries are buying weapons in preparation for a potential war, that is unmistakably true, and undeniably true. And they are making money; they are benefiting off of this. So for right now, they like this. They like the fact that Biden is a puppet that they can control very easily. They don't like the idea of Trump coming back into power, because when Trump was in power, there was none of this stuff going on, presumably because he was getting in the way of allowing these things to happen. I don't know. It's a very complex situation. And I tell you what, the next 5-10 years of the world are in the balance right now. Not in the balance in the way that, a couple of weeks ago they were saying World War III is coming, we're all going to die. They're talking about conscription in Britain and stuff. I don't see that happening at all. If that does happen, I think it would come from China. But I see no reason for China to do anything like this. You know, their economy is booming with massive potential. Excuse me. I mean, they're in an excellent position. So I don't see them wanting to screw it up by starting a war. And Russia, I don't think are, despite what they suggest, I don't think they're in a position to start a war. And genuinely, I don't think they want to either. I don't see how it would benefit them. But the next 5, 10 years are going to be interesting.
Moreover, the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. But how are we going to negotiate if he forbade himself and everyone to do this? We know that he is putting
Fair
forward
question.
some ideas about this settlement, but in order to agree on something, we need to have a dialogue. Is that not right?
Well, but you wouldn't be speaking to the Ukrainian president, you'd be speaking to the American president. When was the last time you spoke to Joe Biden?
I cannot remember when I talked to him. I do not remember. We can look it up.
You don't remember?
No. Why? Do I have to remember everything? I have my own things to do. We have domestic political affairs.
Well, he's funding the war that you're fighting, so I would think that would be memorable.
Well, yes, he funds, but I talked to him before the special military operation, of course. And I said to him then, by the way, I will not go into details, I never do, but I said to him then, I believe that you are making a huge mistake of historic proportions by supporting everything that is happening there, in Ukraine, by pushing Russia away. I told him repeatedly, by the way. I think that would be correct if I stop here.
What did he say?
Ask him, please. It is easier for you. You are a citizen of the United States. Go and ask him. It is not appropriate for me to comment on our conversation.
But
You would think it'd be easier for him being a member of the United States, but I guarantee you getting a straight answer out of a politician is like getting blood out of a stone. It's interesting that Putin is taking this stance, to be honest with you, because, you know, can a Russian person get an answer out of Putin about anything? A straight answer, an honest answer? I very much doubt it.
But you haven't spoken to him since before February of 2022.
No, we haven't spoken. Certain contacts are being maintained, though. Speaking of which, do you remember what I told you about my proposal to work together on a missile defense system?
Yes.
You can ask all of them. All of them are safe and sound, thank God. The former president, Condoleezza, is safe and sound, and I think Mr. Gates and the current director of the intelligence agency, Mr. Burns, the then ambassador to Russia, in my opinion, are very successful ambassador. They were all witnesses to these conversations. Ask them. Same here, if you are interested in what Mr. President...
I believe that to be true, actually. There is a lot of documented evidence to suggest that they did offer a pact to work together on a missile system. And when they were denied, I forget now. There's a Russian equivalent of NATO, effectively, or there was before USSR collapsed and Yugoslavia got broke up, etc. But yeah, I don't know enough about that to talk about that at the moment. But what he's saying is factually true. He did make that offer. It was, I think, documented at least somewhere, and it's generally considered to be true.
President Biden responded to me, ask him. At any rate, I talked to him about it.
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
Все очень, всё очень
What's there to work out? It's very simple. I repeat,
Есть контакты по линии там различных.
we have contacts through various agencies.
Я вам скажу, что мы говорим на этот счет.
I will tell you what we are saying on this matter and what we are conveying to the US leadership.
Боевые.
If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it.
Тогда можно договориться.
And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that,
Что проще?
stop.
Чё мне звонить?
What's easier? Why would I call him?
Или
What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what
вы
messages do you
собираетесь
get back?
поставить такое-то оружие на Украину? Ой,
You're going to deliver such and such weapons to Ukraine? Oh, I'm afraid, please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious.
That's an interesting stance, considering what I said earlier about the threat of World War III. I don't see it. I mean, I did see it. I believed it. I thought it was coming. I thought there was a potential chance of it. But having actually done some research and just seen the way that Russia has behaved and reacted to situations in the past 50 years, I just don't see it. I really genuinely don't see it as a viable option right now. I certainly don't think it's imminent. I'd be incredibly surprised. And this interview is brilliant for backing that up. Now, bear in mind, Putin has lied many times in the past. He's probably a very good liar. So always take that with a pinch of salt. But genuinely, I see no evidence of it at the moment.
Fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people understand perfectly well that this is a fake.
раздувается.
They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
The threat I think you're referring to is a Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist behavior. Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Только в одном случае, если со стороны.
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why?
Поэтому
Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else.
нигде.
Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest. It's just threat mongering.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine, he has territorial aims across the continent, and you're saying unequivocally you don't.
Это абсолютно исключено.
It is absolutely out of the
Не надо
question.
быть никаким аналитиком.
You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war.
Глобальная война поставить на грань.
And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious.
Вот. И есть, конечно, средства.
There are certainly means of deterrence. They have been scaring everyone with us all along. Tomorrow Russia will use tactical nuclear weapons. Tomorrow Russia will use that.
Страшнее
No, the day after tomorrow. So what?
выбить из налогоплательщиков
In order to
США
extort additional money from US taxpayers and European taxpayers in the confrontation with Russia in the Ukrainian theater of war.
как можно.
The goal is to weaken Russia as much as possible.
One of our senior United States senators from the state of New York, Chuck Schumer, said yesterday, I believe, that we have to continue to fund the Ukrainian effort or US soldiers, citizens could wind up fighting there. How do you assess that?
Это провокация.
This is a provocation, and a cheap provocation at that.
Американские солдаты должны воевать.
I do not understand why American soldiers should fight in Ukraine. There are mercenaries from the United States there. The bigger number of mercenaries comes from Poland, with mercenaries from the United States in second place, and mercenaries from Georgia in third place.
Безусловно.
Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia? Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end? And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests.
What are their interests? This is what I don't think he's ever quite clarified properly. There's lots of speculation. I've thrown my own speculation in there, but I wish he'd just bloody come out and say it. Do you know what I mean? Hopefully Tucker will ask him exactly what would you ask for in order for the war to stop.
And look for certain solutions. It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби, у вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Знаете,
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West, did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
Good question.
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States, because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media.
That's very
The
true.
ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't
Absolutely.
you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak. We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results. It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly. It's true.
Yes, but here's a question you may be able to answer. You worked in Germany, famously. The Germans clearly know that their NATO partner did this, and it damaged their economy greatly. It may never recover. Why are they being silent about it? That's very confusing to me. Why wouldn't the Germans say something about it?
This also confuses me. But today's German leadership is guided by the interests of the collective West rather than its national interests. Otherwise, it is difficult to explain the logic of their action or inaction. After all, it is not only about Nord Stream 1, which was blown up, and the Nord Stream 2 was damaged. But one pipe is safe and sound, and gas can be supplied to Europe through it. But Germany does not open it. We are ready, please. There's another route through Poland, called Yamal Europe, which also allows for large flow. Poland has closed it, but Poland packs from the German hand. It receives money from the pan-European funds, and Germany is the main donor to these pan-European funds. Germany feeds Poland to a certain extent. and they closed their route to Germany. Why? I don't understand. Ukraine, to which the Germans supply weapons and give money. Germany is the second sponsor of the United States in terms of financial aid to Ukraine. There are two gas routes through Ukraine. They simply closed one route, the Ukrainians. Open the second route and please get gas from Russia. They do not open it. Why don't the Germans say, look guys, we give you money and weapons, open up the valve, please, let the gas from Russia pass through for us. We're buying liquefied gas at exorbitant prices in Europe, which brings the level of our competitiveness and economy in general down to zero.
Again, this is one of those things I'm going to have to do a bit of research on, but my knee-jerk reaction here is, well, it very much sounds like Russia were hoping to benefit from the Nord Stream destruction, because then everyone would have to take, the second route via Ukraine, and then basically Russia would control that route to pretty much all of Europe. But again, I don't know enough to be sure about that. But my knee-jerk reaction is, I think Russia benefit from that more than anyone else. In fact, kind of by his own admission, everyone else seems to suffer as a result.
Do you want us to give you money? Let us have the decent existence. Make money for our economy, because this is where the money we give you comes from. They refuse to do so. Why? Ask them. That is what is like in their heads. Those are highly incompetent people.
Well, maybe the world is breaking into two hemispheres, one with cheap energy, the other without. And I want to ask you that. If we're now a multipolar world, obviously we are, can you describe the blocks of alliances? Who is in each side, do you think?
Listen, you have said that the world is breaking into two hemispheres. A human brain is divided into two hemispheres. One is responsible for one type of activities, the other one is more about creativity and so on. But it is still one and the same head. The world should be a single whole. Security should be shared rather than meant for the golden billion. That is the only scenario where the world could be stable, sustainable, and predictable. Until then, while the head is split in two parts, it is an illness, a serious adverse condition. It is a period of severe disease that the world is going through now. But I think that, thanks to honest journalism, this work is akin to work of the doctors. This could somehow be remedied.
Well, let's just give one example, the US dollar, which has kind of united the world in a lot of ways, maybe not to your advantage, but certainly to ours. Is that going away as the reserve currency, the universally accepted currency? How have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the US political leadership. The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power. I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world. Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the US. But they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? It is about the emission. Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power. I would not like to use any strong language, but It is a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake.
Сокращаются запасы доллара сейчас. Все смотрят на то, что происходит, и начинают
Seems to be a lot of saying things
Look at
without
what is
saying
going on
anything.
in the world. Even the United States allies are now downsizing their dollar reserves. Seeing this, everyone starts looking for ways to protect themselves. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on transactions, freezing assets, etc., causes grave concern and sends a signal to the whole world. What did we have here? Until 2022, about 80% of Russian foreign trade transactions were made in US dollars and euros.
в наших расчетах с третьими странами. Значит,
US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar.
США приняли решение ограничить наши расчеты в долларах.
We had no such intention.
Полная дурь.
It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United States across the world. By the way, our transactions in yuan accounted for about 3%.
Сейчас 34%
Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles and about as much,
столько же 30.
a little over 34% in yuan.
Зачем Соединенные Штаты это сделали?
Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit.
Думали, наверное, что
They
всё
probably thought it would lead to full collapse, but nothing collapsed. Moreover, other countries, including oil producers, are thinking of and already accepting payments for oil in yuan. Do you even realize what is going on or not?
Ну, вы понимаете, что это такое происходит?
Does anyone in the United States realize
Понимает
this?
это в тех же Соединенных Штатах?
What are you doing? You are cutting yourself
Сами
off.
себе
All
обрезаете.
experts say this.
То, что всегда...
Ask any intelligent and thinking person in the United States what the dollar means for the US.
Что такое доллар?
You're killing it with your own hands.
Убивает.
I think that's I think that's a fair assessment. The question is what comes next,
Конечно.
and maybe you trade one colonial power for another, much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean, is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy, in a way that's not good for their sovereignty? Do you worry about that?
Эти страшилки нам...
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that.
У нас
The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again, through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation.
спросите европейцев.
Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know.
Боятся.
But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs.
That's an interesting point, actually, because I've been led to believe that China and Russia are, best buds, and thinking of teaming up and taking the fight to the rest of Britain. Obviously, we've got Taiwan as an issue, but I don't really think, at the moment, at least, Russia are part of that situation. I just don't. And it's interesting that he's highlighting that the trade between China and America and China and Europe is expanding far quicker than it is between China and Russia. If they were best buds, you would think it would be the other way around, surely.
Especially now that they are facing economic problems.
И китайский
Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market.
европейский рынок.
Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States?
Китайский бизнес.
Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China.
Пытаются, ограничить.
It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself. It is a delicate matter, and there are no silver bullet solutions, just as it is with the dollar. So, before introducing any illegitimate sanctions, illegitimate in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, one should think very carefully. For decision makers, this appears to be a problem.
So you said a moment ago that the world would be a lot better if it weren't broken into competing alliances, if there was cooperation globally. Well, one of the reasons you don't have that is because the current American administration is dead set against you. Do you think if there were a new administration after Joe Biden that you would be able to reestablish communication with the US government? Or does it not matter who the president is?
Сейчас скажу, но чтобы закончить предыдущий вопрос. У нас
I will tell you,
200 миллиардов.
but let me finish the previous thought. We, together with my colleague and friend, President Xi Jinping, set a goal to reach $200 billion of mutual trade with China this year. We have exceeded this level. According to our figures, our bilateral trade with China totals already $230 billion, and the Chinese statistics says it is $240 billion. One more important thing, our trade is well balanced, mutually complementary in high-tech, energy, scientific research and development. It is very balanced. As for BRICS, where Russia took over the presidency this year, the BRICS countries are, by and large, developing very rapidly. Look, if memory serves me right, back in 1992, the share of the G7 countries in the world economy amounted to 47%, whereas in 2022 it was down to, I think, a little over 30%.
Четверки в мировой экономике составляла
The BRICS countries accounted for only 16% in 1992, but now their share is greater than that of the G7. It has nothing to do with the events in Ukraine. This is due to the trends of global development and world economy, as I mentioned just now. And this is inevitable. This will keep happening. It is like the rise of the sun. You cannot prevent the sun from rising. You have to adapt to it. How do the United States adapt? With the help of force, sanctions, pressure, bombings, and use of armed forces. This is about self-conceit. Your political establishment does not understand that the world is changing under objective circumstances. And in order to preserve your level, even if someone aspires, pardon me, to the level of dominance, you have to make the right decisions in a competent and timely manner. Such brutal actions, including with regard to Russia and, say, other countries, are counterproductive. This is an obvious fact. It has already become evident.
чтобы сохранить свой уровень. Извините меня, даже если
You just asked me if another leader comes and changes something.
действие,
It is not about the leader. It is not about the personality of a particular person.
это очевидный факт.
I had a very good relationship with, say, Bush. I know that in the United States,
Что-то изменится.
he was portrayed as some kind of a country boy who does not understand much.
Очень добрые были отношения, скажем.
I assure you that this is not the case. I think he made a lot of mistakes with regard to Russia, too.
Деревенским парнем,
I told you about 2008 and the decision in Bucharest to open the NATO's doors for Ukraine and so on. That happened during his presidency. He actually exercised pressure on the Europeans. But in general, on a personal human level, I had a very good relationship with him. He was no worse than any other American or Russian or European politician.
на человеческом уровне.
I assure you, he understood what he was doing as well as others.
Любого другого
I had such personal relationship with Trump as well.
политика, уверяю вас. Он все понимал, что он делает. Так же,
It is not about the personality of the leader, it is about the elite's mindset. If the idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society, nothing will change. It will only get worse.
That's kind of yeah, that rings true with what I said earlier about how it's financially beneficial for there to be a war in Ukraine at the moment because I'm pretty sure that they're not really worried that Russia are going to start invading Poland and stuff. It just makes no sense for them to do that. So therefore, it's a cash spinner. And I think what he's saying, there's a lot of truth in what he's saying. Bear in mind, I'm not pro-Russian or pro-Putin or anything like that. But there's a lot of truth in what he's saying there. That whilst the people behind the president are making lots of money, there's not much chance that it's going to change.
But if, in the end, one comes to the awareness that the world has been changing due to the objective circumstances, and that one should be able to adapt to them in time, using the advantages that the US still has today, then perhaps something may change. Look, China's economy has become the first economy in the world in purchasing power parity. In terms of volume, it overtook the US a long time ago. The USA comes second, then India, 1.5 billion people, and then Japan, with Russia in the fifth place. Russia was the first economy in Europe last year, despite all the sanctions and restrictions. Is it normal from your point of view? Sanctions, restrictions, impossibility of payments in dollars, being cut off from SWIFT services, sanctions against our ships carrying oil, sanctions against airplanes, sanctions in everything, everywhere. The largest number of sanctions in the world which are applied against Russia. And we have become Europe's first economy during this time. The tools that US uses don't work. Well, one has to think about what to do. If this realization comes to the ruling elites, then yes, then the first person of the state will act in anticipation of what the voters and the people who make decisions at various levels expect from this person. Then maybe something will change.
But you're
So I think what he's suggesting there, just to give my two pennies worth, is that basically what I'm saying is that, for a long while now, it very much seems like whoever is president of the country is just a puppet. And the people who are really pulling the strings of the country are out of sight. They're unknown. They're unelectable. You can't stop them. You have no control over them. I believe that to be true. I believe it to be true in Britain. I think, and I've thought this for quite a while now, the curse of planet Earth is global business, big business, like the really, really big business that make billions upon billions every year. They're the ones that are causing all of these problems, from starvation to wars breaking out all over the world. They're responsible for pretty much all of it. Yeah, I really genuinely think that the political spectrum or the political forum across the planet has been totally taken over, and it's all an illusion. There is no democracy anymore because in America, for example, you're only going to be able to elect one of two people at the end of the day. And it's like, well, what if they're both crap? Where's the democracy there? Where's the tick on the box that says, I don't want either of these idiots running my country? Where is that option? That would be democracy, in my opinion. And if I ever become PM, I'll introduce that.
describing two different systems. You say the leader acts in the interest of the voters, but you also say these decisions are not made by the leader, they're made by the ruling classes. You've run this country for so long, you've known all these American presidents. What are those power centers in the United States, do you think? Like, who actually makes the decisions?
Я не знаю. Это Америка сложная страна, такая очень, с одной стороны, консервативная,
I
с
don't
другой
know.
стороны, быстро меняющаяся.
America
Нам
is a
нужно
complex
в
country,
этом разобраться.
conservative on one hand, rapidly changing on the
Кто
other.
принимает решения
It's
на
not
выборах?
easy for us to sort it all out.
Можно это понять. Там
Who makes
демократы
decisions in the elections?
правительство,
Is it possible to
каждый
understand
штат
this
ассамблея
when
делает
each state has its own
остальные
legislation?
выборы.
Each state regulates itself?
Значит,
Someone can be
логично.
excluded from elections at the state
Нам
level.
очень сложно в этом
It is
разобраться.
a two-stage electoral system.
Конечно,
It is
есть,
very difficult for us to understand it.
есть две партии, в которых
Certainly, there are two parties that are dominant, the Republicans and the Democrats, and within this party system, the centers that make decisions, that prepare decisions.
Потом смотрите,
Then, look, why, in my opinion, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an erroneous, crude, completely unjustified policy of pressure was pursued against Russia?
давление.
After all, this is a policy of pressure.
Так,
NATO expansion, support for the separatists in Caucasus, creation of a missile defense system.
все элементы давления.
These are all elements of pressure.
Потом
Pressure,
затягиваем на
pressure, pressure.
This is what I was talking about earlier about all the things that NATO have done. I mean, these for NATO, who arguably have convinced me for years that they are there for the to keep the peace, to keep the peace. That's what they keep saying, but they're doing things like everything he's just mentioned there. That is not keeping the peace at all. And it doesn't matter if you're woke, if you're a conservative, if you're liberal, it matters not. That is not keeping the peace. That is definitely putting pressure on Russia. And the fact that Russia haven't really, I mean, we've all heard stories of Russian subs colliding with British naval vessels, Russian airplanes in British airspace, and so on and so forth. But this is something that has happened for a long time. It's not new, and I'd be hard pressed to say that perhaps we don't do something very similar. We'll fly right along the barrier line, which again is pressure. It's all pressure. It's from a military perspective. I get it. It's about keeping a presence, keeping track of this, keeping track of that. So I totally understand it, but I just feel like from NATO's perspective, they are intentionally creating more pressure, and now certain people are benefiting from it financially.
Then, dragging Ukraine into NATO is all about pressure, pressure, pressure. Why? I think, among other things, because excessive production capacities were created.
There you go. There you go. This is the other thing I said to you. When the USSR collapsed, there were Russian oligarchs who tried to basically buy up all of Ukraine, and they would have owned all the soil, all the land. So there was a law put in place that said nobody can sell farmland in Ukraine at all. So it kind of largely went unused, or wasn't really being used as effectively as it could have been. Anyway, once that was removed, this is when the production line was able to suddenly just accelerate at an unexpected rate. So now Ukraine is a huge producer of sunflower oil, corn, and fruit, and all of a sudden there's money to be made in Ukraine. So that is the reason why they want to bring it into the EU, why they want to bring it into wherever, because they don't want Russia to benefit from all this. They want the EU to benefit from it. Now, the argument is, and you're quite right to say so, that if Ukraine are an independent country, which legally they are, and they should be able to make their own decision about who they pledge their allegiance to. But are they being manipulated into something which benefits other people more than it benefits them. Do you know what I mean? I guess one argument is if Russia do own Crimea, then there's definitely an argument to say, well, it's better for Ukraine to be friends with Russia so that they can use the Crimean docks and ports in order to ship their goods, because you know it's definitely an expanding market for sure.
Confrontation with the Soviet Union, there were many centers created and specialists on the Soviet Union who could not do anything else. They convinced the political leadership that it is necessary to continue chiseling Russia, to try to break it up, to create on this territory several quasi-state entities, and to subdue them in a divided form, to use their combined potential for the future struggle with China. This is a mistake, including the excessive potential of those who worked for the confrontation with the Soviet Union. It is necessary to get rid of this. There should be new, fresh forces, people who look into the future and understand what is happening in the world. Look at how Indonesia is developing. 600 million people. Where can we get away from that? Nowhere. We just have to assume that Indonesia will enter. It is already in the club of the world's leading economies, no matter who likes it or dislikes it. Yes, we understand and are aware that in the United States, despite all the economic problems, the situation is still normal, with the economy growing decently. The GDP is growing by 2.5%, if I'm not mistaken. But if we want to ensure the future, then we need to change our approach to what is changing. As I already said, the world would nevertheless change, regardless of how the developments in Ukraine end. The world is changing. In the United States themselves, experts are writing that the United States are nonetheless gradually changing their position in the world. It is your experts who write that. I just read them. The only question is how this would happen, painfully and quickly, or gently and gradually. And this is written by people who are not anti-American. They simply follow global development trends. That's it. And in order to assess them and change policies, we need people who think, look forward, can analyze and recommend certain decisions at the level of political leaders.
I just have to ask, you've said clearly that NATO expansion eastward is a violation of the promise you all were made in 1990. It's a threat to your country. Right before you sent troops into Ukraine, the Vice President of the United States went to the Munich Security Conference and encouraged the President of Ukraine to join NATO. Do you think that was an effort to provoke you into military action?
Мы просто, я еще раз повторяю, мы многократно предлагали...
I repeat once again, we have repeatedly proposed to seek a solution to the problems that arose in Ukraine after 2014 coup d'etat through peaceful means. But no one listened to us. And moreover, the Ukrainian leaders who were under the complete US control suddenly declared that they would not comply with the Minsk agreements. They disliked everything there and continued military activity in that territory.
So just to give a bit of clarity there, he's talking about the Minsk agreements. I think he spoke about this in part one. Basically, an agreement was formulated, the Minsk agreement, in Budapest or wherever it was, and effectively they said to Putin or Russia, they said, look, how do you expect anyone to accept these terms when you've got troops in Kiev? So Russia said, okay, fair enough. So they pulled all their troops back, 450,000 troops or whatever it was. I don't really know the numbers. But as soon as they did that, America kind of went in there and went, you don't need to agree to these terms. These terms are not good enough. We'll back you. You can go carry on fighting. We'll give you weapons and stuff. And that's what he's talking about now. So it's like they were close. Well, I say close very loosely because the whole argument about the Minsk agreements is that they are not definitive enough. It is not clear who gets what, when, where, and how. So, although he suggests they were close, I think, I don't think they were that close at all. But what he's talking about is that they've tried to do this twice now. The Minsk agreement. There are two versions of it, but still, it's not going to pan out the way anyone wants. And it always seems to come down to Crimea. I think Crimea is the key thing that no one is willing to budge on.
And in parallel, that territory was being exploited by NATO military structures under the guise of various personnel training and retraining centers. They essentially began to create bases there. That's all. Ukraine announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality, while passing the laws that limit the rights of non-titular nationalities in Ukraine. Ukraine, having received all these southeastern territories as a gift from the Russian people, suddenly announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality in that territory. Is that normal?
That's something that Tucker Carlson should definitely have picked him up on. He said it twice now. I meant to say something about it earlier. But when the USSR, or just before the USSR collapsed, as I said earlier, Crimea was given to Croatia. Crimea was given to Ukraine. Thank you. And then the USSR collapsed, which meant that Ukraine were no longer under the control of Russia, or so to speak, the Soviet Union. And they, in essence, then lost, contractual rights to Crimea. So he should push him on that and say, well, Crimea was given to Ukraine. Why do you think you have the right to it anymore? It was given away by your leader back in whenever it was, 1954, 64? I forget now. 54, I think it was. He should really push him on that, because he never really sort of addresses that fact that it was given to Ukraine and therefore it's not yours anymore. You can't just go and take it back. It's like when you give somebody a Christmas present, you go, do you know what? I really wanted that, actually. You can't just give them and take it back. It doesn't work that way. It's not acceptable.
All this put together led to the decision to end the war that neo-Nazis started in Ukraine in 2014.
Do you think Zelensky has the freedom to negotiate a settlement to this conflict?
Good question.
I don't know the details. Of course, it's difficult for me to judge. But I believe he has, in any case, he used to have. His father fought against the fascists, Nazis, during World War II. I once talked to him about this. I said, Volodya, what are you doing? Why are you supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine today, while your father fought against fascism? He was a front-line soldier. I will not tell you what he answered. This is a separate topic, and I think it's incorrect for me to do so. But as to the freedom of choice, why not? He came to power on the expectations of Ukrainian people that he would lead Ukraine to peace. He talked about this. It was thanks to this that he won the elections overwhelmingly. But then, when he came to power, in my opinion, he realized two things. Firstly, it is better not to clash with neo-Nazis and nationalists, because they are aggressive and very active. You can expect anything from them. And secondly, the US-led West supports them and will always support those who antagonize with Russia. It is beneficial and safe. So he took the relevant position despite promising his people to end the war in Ukraine.
That, again, is something that has been proven to be true. His electoral campaign, the campaign upon which he won the presidency, did say that he wanted to remain neutral and basically end the war in Ukraine. But yeah, it very much has his. When was it? I can't remember when he signed it. The Crimean Platform agreement, which clarified that no negotiation without Crimea will be considered. Again, it comes back to Crimea. But before he got into power, he wasn't saying that. That wasn't part of his manifesto. So certainly, once he got into power, somebody somewhere somehow said something to him that changed his mind, and America could be very persuasive, I
He
guess.
deceived his voters.
But do you think at this point, as of February 2024, he has the latitude, the freedom to speak with you or your government directly about putting an end to this, which clearly isn't helping his country or the world? Can he do that, do you think?
Ну, а почему нет? Он же
Why
считается
not?
главой государства.
He considers
народа.
himself
Хотя
head of
мы
state.
считаем в
He
России,
won
что
the
все, что
elections.
произошло после 2014
Although we believe in
года,
Russia that the coup d'etat
первичным
is the
источником
primary
власти
source of
является
power
власть
for
переворот.
everything
И в
that
этом смысле
happened
даже
after
сегодняшняя власть
2014.
является ущербной.
And in this
Но
sense,
он
even
считается
today, government
президентом,
is flawed.
в этом качестве его
But he
признали
considers
Соединенные
himself the
Штаты, вся
president, and
Европа,
he
ну и
is
там,
recognized
весь
by the
остальной мир.
United States,
Почему нет?
all of Europe,
Он
and
может. Мы же
practically the rest of the
переделали
world in such a capacity.
Стамбул.
Why not? He
Договорились, он
can.
же знал об этом. Более
We
того,
negotiated with Ukraine in
руководитель переговорной
Istanbul.
группы
We agreed.
Арахамия,
He
по-моему,
was aware of
он
this.
до сих пор
Moreover,
возглавляет
the
фракцию,
negotiation group leader, Mr.
правящей
Arahamia
партии,
is his last name,
правящей партии,
I believe still
партии
heads the
президента
faction of the ruling party,
в Раде. Он же
the party
возглавляет
of the
до сих пор
president in the Rada.
фракцию президента в Раде, в
He still heads the
парламенте.
presidential faction in the Rada, the
Он даже
country's
поставил свою
parliament.
подпись
He still sits
предварительно
there.
на этом документе, о
He
котором
even put his preliminary
А потом
signature
он
on the
же
document
публично
I am
на весь
telling
мир
you
заявил,
about.
мы были
But then
готовы
he
подписать.
publicly
Но
stated to the
приехал
whole
господин
world,
Джонсон,
we were ready to
тогда
sign this
премьер-министр
document, but
Великобритании,
Mr.
отговорил
Johnson,
нас об
then
этом
the
и
Prime Minister
сказал,
of
что
Great
лучше
Britain,
воевать с Россией.
came and
Они нам
dissuaded
все
us
дадут
from
для
doing
того,
this,
чтобы мы
saying it
вернули
was better to fight
утраченное
Russia. They would give everything needed for us to return what was lost during the clashes with Russia. And we agreed with this proposal. Look, his statement has been published. He said it publicly. Can they return to this or not? The question is, do they want it or not?
Еще господин президент
Further on, President of Ukraine issued a decree prohibiting negotiations with us.
Ну пусть он отменит
Let
этот
him
декрет.
cancel that
Мы же не
decree,
отказывались никогда от
and
переговоров.
that's it.
Вот нам всё
We have
время
never
пишут,
refused
готова Россия,
negotiations,
готова. Да мы
indeed.
не отказывались.
We hear all the
Они же
time, is
публично-
Russia
публично
ready?
отказали.
Yes, we have not refused. It
Пускай
was them
отменит
who
свой
publicly
декрет и
refused.
вступайте в переговоры.
Well,
Мы не
let him
отказывались.
cancel his
А то,
decree
что они
and enter into
подчинились
negotiations.
требованию либо
We
уговорам
have never
бывшего
refused.
премьер-министра Великобритании господина Джонсона,
And the fact
ну,
that
мне
they
кажется,
obeyed the demand or
нелепо,
persuasion of Mr. Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain,
печально, потому что,
seems ridiculous
как
and
сказал
very sad to
господин
me,
Арахамия, мы еще
because, as
1,5 года назад
Mr.
могли
Arakamiya put it,
прекратить эти
we could have
бои.
stopped those hostilities with
Но
war
нас
a year and a half ago
уговорили,
already.
и мы от этого отказались.
But the British persuaded us and we
Джонсон,
refused
а
this.
война продолжается.
Where is Mr. Johnson now? And the war continues.
That's a good question. Where do you think he is, and why did he do that?
Да хрен его знает, зачем это, если я не понимаю. Общая
Hell
установка была.
knows.
Почему-то
I
у всех
don't
сложилась
understand it
иллюзия,
myself.
что Россию можно победить на поле боя.
There was a general starting point. For some reason, everyone had the illusion that Russia could be defeated on the battlefield.
От чистого сердца, но
Because of arrogance, because of a pure heart, but not because of a great mind.
You've described the connection between Russia and Ukraine. You've described Russia itself a couple of times as orthodox. That's central to your understanding of Russia. You've said you're orthodox. What does that mean for you? You're a Christian leader by your own description. So what effect does that have on you?
You know,
знаете, вот
as I already mentioned, in
как я уже сказал,
988,
в 988
Prince
году
Vladimir himself was
Владимир
baptized
крестил.
following the
Сам
example of
крестился
his
по примеру
grandmother,
своей
Princess
бабки
Olga.
Ольги.
And then he baptized his squad. And then, gradually, over the course of several years, he baptized all the Rus. It was a lengthy process, from pagans to Christians. It took many years. But in the end, this orthodoxy, Eastern Christianity, deeply rooted itself in the consciousness of the Russian people. When Russia expanded and absorbed other nations who profess Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism, Russia has always been very loyal to those people who profess other religions. This is her strength. This is absolutely clear. And the fact is that the main postulates, main values are very similar, not to say the same, in all world religions I've just mentioned, and which are the traditional religions of the Russian Federation, Russia. By the way, Russian authorities were always very careful about the culture and religion of those people who came into the Russian Empire. This, in my opinion, forms the basis of both security and stability of the Russian statehood. All the peoples inhabiting Russia basically consider it their motherhood. If, say, people move over to you or to Europe from Latin America, an even clearer and more understandable example, people come, but yet they have come to you or to European countries from their historical homeland. And people who profess different religions in Russia consider Russia their motherland. They have no other motherland. We are together. This is one big family. And our traditional values are very similar. I've just mentioned one big family, but everyone has his, her own family. And this is the basis of our society. And if we say that the motherland and the family are specifically connected with each other, it is indeed the case, since it is impossible to ensure a normal future for our children and our families unless we ensure a normal, sustainable future for the entire country, for the motherland. That is why patriotic sentiment is so strong in Russia.
But can I say that the one way in which the religions are different is that Christianity is specifically a nonviolent religion. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, don't kill. How can a leader who has to kill, of any country, how can a leader be a Christian? How do you reconcile that to yourself?
It is very easy when it comes to protecting oneself and one's family, one's homeland. We won't attack anyone. When did the developments in Ukraine start? Since
We won't attack anyone, and yet they went into Ukraine. But his argument for that is that the Ukrainians were killing Russians who lived in Ukraine. Trying to think now. Can I find this information in a sizable time? No, I can't. But it was the collapse of the Minsk agreements of 2014, basically. That's his argument was, they were killing Russians, so we went in there to stop that from happening, rather than we attacked Ukraine. We were defending our own people. That's his argument, and that's, I think, what he underpins all of this on is that we're defending Russians who live in Ukraine. I think fundamentally that's his argument for going into Ukraine. Taking back Crimea he hasn't really justified that, I don't think, in any way, shape, or form. So, you can't trust everything he says, that's for sure.
the coup d'etat and the hostilities in Donbass began, that's when they started. And we're protecting our people, ourselves, our homeland, and our future.
Swear to God, I didn't know he was going to literally repeat what I just said. But that I knew that was his argument, so yeah, I'm not that surprised.
Не во внешних проявлениях, и в том, чтобы ходить
As for religion in general,
или бить головой в пол. Она в сердце.
you know, it's not about external manifestations. It's not about going to church every day or banging your head on the floor.
Человекоориентированная. И
It is in the heart.
Banging your head on the floor. I think that's is that not like a quippy sort of underhanded joke at the expense of Islam? Is that do you think what he's saying there? I think it is.
And our culture is so human-oriented.
гений.
Dostoevsky, who was very well known in the West and the genius of Russian culture, Russian literature, spoke a lot about this, about the Russian soul.
Русский человек, российский человек, он думает больше о вечном, он думает больше о ценностях.
After all, Western society is more pragmatic. Russian people think more about the eternal, about moral values. I don't know, maybe you won't agree with me, but Western culture is more pragmatic after all.
Возможность вот сегодняшнему этому золотому миллиарду.
I'm not saying this is bad. It makes it possible for today's golden billion to achieve good success in production, even in science and so on.
Что мы вроде как выглядим одинаково, но
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that we kind of look the same, but our
Well,
minds
so
are
do you
built a
see
little
the
different.
supernatural at work as you look out across what's happening in the world now? Do you see God at work? Do you ever think to yourself, these are forces that are not human?
Да нет, я, честно говоря, так не думаю. Я думаю о том, что
No, to be honest, I don't
мировое
think
сообщество
so.
развивается вот по своим внутренним
My opinion is that the development of the world community is in accordance with the inherent laws, and those laws are what they are.
Так было всегда в истории человечества.
It's always been this way in the history of mankind. Some nations and countries rose, became stronger and more numerous, and then left the international stage, losing the status they had accustomed to.
Не нужно приводить эти примеры, но начиная
There's probably no need for me to give examples, but we could start with the Genghis Khan and horde conquerors, the Golden Horde, and then end with the Roman Empire.
человечество каждый
It seems that there has never been anything like the Roman Empire in the history of mankind.
потенциал варваров постепенно накапливался.
Nevertheless, the potential of the barbarians gradually grew, as did their population. In general, the barbarians were getting stronger and begun to develop economically, as we would say today.
Экономически они стали укрепляться.
This eventually led to the collapse of the Roman Empire and the regime imposed by the Romans.
500 лет. Этот процесс
However, it took 5 centuries for the Roman Empire to fall apart.
в сегодняшней ситуации
The
разница
difference with what is happening now
процессы изменений
is that all the processes of change are happening at a much faster pace than in Roman times.
So when does the AI empire start, do you think?
всё более
You're
сложные
asking
вопросы.
increasingly more complicated questions. To answer them, you need to be an expert in big
Для того,
numbers,
чтобы
big
ответить,
data,
надо быть,
and
конечно,
AI.
специалистом в
Mankind is
сфере
currently
чисел,
facing many threats.
в сфере
Due to the genetic researches, it is now possible to create a superhuman, a specialized human being, a genetically engineered athlete, scientist, military man. There are reports that Elon Musk had already had a chip implanted in the human brain in the USA.
Илон Маск внедрил уже чип в мозг какого-то человека.
What do you think of that?
Ну, Маска, я думаю, что Маска
Well,
невозможно.
I think there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit.
Надо искать
Nevertheless,
способы
you need to find some common ground with him,
то есть
search for ways to persuade him. I think he's a smart person, I truly believe he is.
нужно
So you need to reach an agreement with him because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules.
того, что будет происходить с ним в связи с развитием вот этих новейших исследований и технологий.
Humanity has to consider what is going to happen due to the newest development in genetics or in AI. One can make an approximate prediction of what will happen.
Угрозу своему существованию от ядерного оружия, все начали
Once mankind felt an existential threat coming from nuclear weapons, all nuclear nations began to come to terms with one another since they realized the negligent use of nuclear weaponry could drive humanity to extinction.
искусственного интеллекта, либо генетики, либо еще каких-то современных направлений, остановить которые невозможно.
It is impossible to stop research in genetics or AI today, just as it was impossible to stop the use of gunpowder back in the day.
Эти исследования все равно будут. Но когда человечество почувствует угрозу для себя.
But as soon as we realize that the threat comes from unbridled and uncontrolled development of AI, or genetics, or any other field, the time will come to reach an international agreement on how to regulate these things.
I appreciate all the time you've given us. I just got to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
That's a ballsy question.
Мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали все лимиты.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил.
We have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner. However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that if our partners take reciprocal steps.
Okay.
When I talk about the partners, I first of all refer to special services. Special services are in contact with one another. They are talking about the matter in question. There is no taboo to settle this issue. We are willing to solve it. But there are certain terms being discussed via special services channels. I believe an agreement can be reached.
So typically, I mean, this stuff has happened for obviously centuries. One country catches another spy within its borders, it trades it for one of its own intel guys in another country. I think what makes, and it's not my business, but what makes this different is the guy's obviously not a spy, he's a kid. And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy, and everybody knows that. And he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true, and everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, somebody else in exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
Вы знаете,
Interesting.
можно как угодно говорить, что такое шпион, что не шпион.
You know, you can give different interpretations to what constitutes a spy, but there are certain things provided by law. If a person gets secret information and does that in a conspiratorial manner, then this is qualified as espionage. And that is exactly what he was doing. He was receiving classified, confidential information, and he did it covertly. Maybe he did that out of carelessness or his own initiative. Considering the sheer fact, this is qualified as espionage. The fact has been proven, as he was caught red-handed when he was receiving this information. If it had been some far-fetched excuse, some fabrication, something not proven, it would have been a different story then. But he was caught red-handed when he was secretly getting confidential information. What is it then?
But are you
This is where you just feel like, I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if what you're saying is true. Do you know what I mean? I don't know anything about this guy. 23 years old. Seems very young. Well, I don't know. Seems young to be a super spy or a spy of any kind, but, I could be wrong. Because they do, I know, and they have approached people who are still at university, still at college, and you know that's 5 years of training. He could definitely be ready to be a spy, I suppose, arguably. Whether or not he is a spy, I have no idea. Not the faintest idea whatsoever. Whether or not they caught him red-handed, there are kids in Britain, there are British kids who hack into military, like American military secure servers, just for the sake of doing it, just for the challenge, just for the kick, just for the fact that they can go, look what I did. Do you know what I mean? And then these people end up going to prison and they're charged for spy like hacking sort of things. It does happen. It could be one of those instances. I don't know. But pretty ballsy, I think, of Tucker Carlson just to ask that.
You're suggesting that he was working for the US government or NATO, or he was just a reporter who was given material he wasn't supposed to have? Those seem like very different.
Okay, a reporter given information that he shouldn't have, that is very much, I mean, you are towing the line there, aren't you? If that's what's happened, if Tucker Carlson is, being genuine on what he's saying there and he believes that to be true, then you are tiptoeing on spy land there by being a reporter and gaining information, sensitive information that you're not supposed to have. Yeah, that's teetering on the edge of being a spy. I'm sorry, but it
Very
is.
different things.
Я не знаю, на кого он работал. Но повторяю еще раз.
I don't know who he was working for, but I would like to reiterate that getting classified information in secret is called espionage, and he was working for the US Special Services, some other agencies.
Did he just completely contradict himself there or not? He doesn't know who he was working for, but he was working for special services.
I don't think he was working for Monaco, as Monaco is hardly interested in getting that information. It is up to special services to come to an agreement. Some groundwork has been laid. There are people who, in our view, are not connected with special services. Let me tell you a story about a person serving a sentence in an allied country of the US. That person, due to patriotic sentiments, eliminated a bandit in one of the European capitals. During the
So he killed somebody, right? Okay.
events in the Caucasus, do you know what he was doing? I don't want to say that, but I will do it anyway. He was laying our soldiers, taken prisoner, on the road and then drove his car over their heads.
Right. Okay. So what he's depicting there is this: there's a guy who, if it's true, committed war crimes against Russians, and then another Russian went to an allied country of America, killed this guy, assassinated him, and then ended up in prison. Well, yeah, that's pretty much how it goes, and quite rightly too. Not saying that if the guy was actually doing what he's saying, war crimes, driving over people's heads, is okay, but you can't just turn up in someone else's country and start killing people, even if they are bad, I suppose. Which, wow, that's it. There's a deep conversation to be had there. But yeah, that's a very different situation, I think. But both valid. One's a murderer and one's receiving sensitive information. I don't really see a solution to this.
What kind of person is that? Can he even be called human? But there was a patriot who eliminated him in one of the European capitals. Whether he did it of his own volition or not, that is a different question.
Yeah, but Evan Gershkovich didn't do that. I mean, that's a completely different. I mean, this is a 32-year-old newspaper reporter.
He committed something different.
Да, он не просто журналист. Я повторяю еще раз, это журналист,
He's
который
not
получил
just a
секретную
journalist.
информацию на
I reiterate, he's a journalist who was
да, это другая
secretly
история
giving
совсем. Я
confidential
просто говорю про
information.
тех людей, которые
Yes, it is different, but
находятся
still,
по
I'm
сути
talking
под
about other
контролем
people who are
властей США,
essentially
где бы они ни
controlled by the
сидели.
US authorities, wherever they are
И
serving a
между
sentence.
спецслужбами идет диалог.
There is an ongoing dialogue between the
Это должно
special
решаться тихо,
services.
спокойно.
This has to be resolved in a calm, responsible, and
Контакты есть,
professional
контакты.
manner. They are keeping in
Я не
touch,
исключаю,
so
что
let them
и
do their work.
тот человек, о котором вы сказали, господин
I do not rule out that the
Гершковец,
person you refer to, Mr. Gershkovits, may return to his motherland.
в тюрьме в России.
By the end of the day, it does not make any sense to keep him in prison in Russia. We want the US Special Services to think about how they can contribute to achieving the goals our special services are pursuing. We are ready to talk. Moreover, the talks are underway. And there have been many successful examples of these talks crowned with success.
You have to accept the fact that it's possible that American forces have deliberately obscured something. Hang on, I think I have a delivery. Yeah, sorry. So the chances of America openly admitting to having a spy, very, 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 very unlikely. Even if he is a spy, they would never admit it, would they? So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I suppose.
Probably this is going to be crowned with success as well.
Только надо договариваться.
But we have to come to an agreement.
I hope you let him out. Mr. President, thank you.
Мне тоже хотелось,
I also
чтобы-
want him to return to his homeland at last. I'm absolutely sincere.
Ну,
But
повторяю,
let me say
диалог
once
идет.
again, the
Чем
dialogue
больше мы придаем
continues.
огласки,
The more public we
вещи
render
подобного
things
рода,
of this
тем
nature,
сложнее их решить.
the more difficult it becomes to resolve them.
Всё должно быть.
Everything has to be done in calm manner.
I wonder if that's true
Закрытом
with
режиме.
with the war, though. Also, I mean, I guess I want to ask one more question, which is, and maybe you don't want to say so for strategic reasons, but are you worried that what's happening in Ukraine could lead to something much larger and much more horrible? And how motivated are you just to call the U.S. government and say, let's come to terms?
Zina already asked that question.
Послушайте, я же сказал.
I
что мы
already said that
отказываемся
we
от
did not
переговоров.
refuse to talk.
Мы
We
же
are
Yeah.
willing to
отказываемся.
negotiate.
Это
It is the Western side,
западные
and
страны.
Ukraine is obviously a
Украина,
satellite state of the
безусловно,
US.
сателлит,
It is
Соединенных
evident.
Штатов сегодня. Но это
I
же
do not
очевидно,
want
правда?
you
Я
to
не хочу,
take it
чтобы
as
это
if
звучало
I'm
как,
looking for a
как
strong word or an
ругательство
insult,
или оскорбление
but we
кого-то.
both
Вы
understand what
же
is
понимаете,
happening.
да, что происходит? Финансовая поддержка, сколько, 72 миллиардов?
The financial
На
support,
втором,
$72 billion US dollars, was provided. Germany ranks second, then other European countries come.
Огромный поток идет.
Dozens of billions of US dollars are
Of
going
course,
to
yeah.
Ну,
Ukraine.
конечно, поэтому,
There's a huge
поэтому,
influx of
ну,
weapons.
скажите,
In this case, you should tell the current Ukrainian leadership to stop and come to negotiating table, rescind this absurd decree.
садитесь, переговаривайтесь.
We did
Мы
not
же не
refuse.
отказались.
Sure, but you already said it. I didn't think you meant it as an insult because you already said correctly, it's been reported that Ukraine was prevented from negotiating a peace settlement by the former British Prime Minister acting on behalf of the Biden administration. So of course they're a satellite. Big countries control small countries. That's not new. And that's why I asked about dealing directly with the Biden administration, which is making these decisions, not President Zelensky of Ukraine.
I feel like Tucker is fishing a little bit here. I don't think Tucker's a big fan of Biden. But I feel like he's kind of fishing a smidge and wanting him to say something about Biden. But I don't think, not only is he not politically stupid enough to say something like that, I genuinely don't think he has any sort of opinions about, I mean, he probably does have opinions about Biden, but I don't think they in any way bother him or change the way he thinks about how he's going to behave. I genuinely don't. But I do feel like Tucker's fishing a little bit there.
Ну, если администрация Зеленского на Украине отказалась от переговоров,
Well, if the Zelensky administration in Ukraine refused to negotiate, I assume they did it under the instruction from Washington. If Washington believes it to be the wrong decision, let it abandon it. Let it find a delicate excuse so that no one is insulted. Let it come up with a way out. It was not us who made this decision, it was them. So let them go back on it. That is it. However, they made the wrong decision, and now we have to look for a way out of the situation to correct their mistakes. They did it, so let them correct it themselves. We support this.
So I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying. I don't think that I am. I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature and then he himself
This is the second one, by the way, because the first one was not deemed acceptable.
said, we were ready to sign it and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago. However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance. Well, you missed it, you made a mistake, let them get back to that, that is all. Why do we have to bother ourselves and correct somebody else's mistakes?
Again, it all comes down to Crimea. Russia is saying Crimea is not on the table, and Ukraine is saying unless Crimea is on the table, we're not negotiating. That is the crux here.
I know one can say it is our mistake. It was us who intensified the situation and decided to put an end to the war that started in 2014 in Donbass. As I have already said, by means of weapons.
Earlier on, when I was trying to remember where it was Donbass. That's what I was trying to remember. Thank you, Putin, for reminding me.
Let me get back to further in history. I already told you this. We were just discussing it. Let us go back to 1991, when we were promised that NATO would not expand, to 2008, when the doors to NATO opened to the declaration of state sovereignty of Ukraine, declaring Ukraine a neutral state. Let us go back to the fact that NATO and US military bases started to appear on the territory of Ukraine, creating threats to us. Let us go back to coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014. It is pointless though, isn't it? We may go back and forth endlessly, but they stopped negotiations. Is it a mistake? Yes. Correct it. We are ready. What else is needed?
Do you think it's too humiliating at this point for NATO to accept Russian control of what was 2 years ago Ukrainian territory?
I said let them think how to do it with dignity. There are options if there is a will. Up until now, there has been the uproar and screaming about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. Now they are apparently coming to realize that it is difficult to achieve, if possible at all. In my opinion, it is impossible by definition. It is never going to happen. It seems to me that now, those who are in power in the West have come to realize this as well. If so, if the realization has set in, they have to think what to do next. We are ready for this dialogue.
Would you be willing to say, congratulations, NATO, you won, and just keep the situation where it is now?
You know, it is a subject matter for the negotiations. No one is willing to conduct, or, to put it more accurately, they are willing, but do not know how to do it. I know they want to. It is not just I see it, but I know they do want it. But they are struggling to understand how to do it. They have driven the situation to the point where we are at. It is not us who have done that, it is our partners, opponents who have done that. Well, now let them think how to reverse the situation. We're not against it. It would be funny if it were not so sad.
So I think I'm trying to piece together all the conversations. An awful lot of it's such a complex area, but what he's basically saying is the coup d'etat in 2014, which has been documented and has been proven to be true, it basically America going in and forcing the what was a democratic election to be retaken twice in order for a pro-American leader to be put in place is basically what set all this off. That combined with NATO encroaching upon Eastern countries when they promised that they wouldn't do that. Now, the argument is that these are free countries; they could do what they bloody like. Russia have no um, have no demands or control over these countries, and in essence, these countries have done what they like. It's just that Russia don't like it. Um, but I mean, Russia haven't really done anything to counteract that. They haven't started invading countries. Ukraine is a very different situation, but they haven't really done anything in response to this NATO creep. They just highlight the fact that you promised you wouldn't do it and you've done it anyway. So how is that a Russian mistake? That's an American mistake and a mistake of all NATO countries. I think that's basically what it all boils down to. And he's basically trying to roll back history and say, if you go back to 2014, if they hadn't have done that, then we wouldn't have gone into Donbass to protect Russians that were being killed there. And had the agreement not been thrown out, we pulled our forces back so that you could agree to the settlement, but then you didn't agree to the settlement. And, it's just, it doesn't feel anymore. Is it justified? I think that was the question, wasn't it? Is it justified? Do you know what? I still say no, but I'm not as sure as I used to be. If America went in and deliberately replaced a democratically elected leader in order to have more pro-US control over the country, and then started oppressing Russians in Ukraine, then I can 100% understand why Russia would go in and defend those people. If you put the shoe on a different foot, say Argentina intervened in the Falkland Islands, put someone in charge there who was pro-Argentina and started killing British people, I would hope, I mean, Margaret Thatcher would have done it, but I would hope that the British government would go and send troops over and do something about it. I would hope they would do that. Although the Falklands is a massively different situation because the Falklands is miles away from any British territory. I totally understand why we want it, why we have it, and how strategically important it is for Britain. I totally get that. And from a military perspective, you would want to hold on to it. And there's arguments for and against that, obviously, in many, 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 many. You never get to the bottom of that particular barrel of fish. But yeah, I mean, Crimea is what, 5 miles away from Russia? 5 miles away from being physically connected. I'm surprised Russia don't have a word with China and just get a bit of land extended out so that it's touching Crimea and then say, well, there you go, there's our land connection. It's ours now. I'm also a little bit surprised that they don't utilize the little jutty out bit to the right of Crimea and just turn that into a naval base. I'm not entirely completely understanding what what's so beneficial about Crimea? As far as I understand it, Crimea has, for all intents and purposes, been a holiday destination for people for many, many years. Seems a bit over the top to go to war so that you've got a nice holiday location to go to. Um, but I don't know. I'm definitely seeing things in a different light. Putin is not the crazy COVID fearing madman that I was led to believe he was. He's a very smart, very intellectual, very eloquent, very smart guy. Do I believe that he has killed people who stand against him? I certainly would not rule that out. I would be very nervous to cross Putin if I was in Russia. And obviously, there are lots of human rights issues that certainly haven't been cleared up. And I'm surprised Tucker Carlson didn't raise them with him, to be fair. Kudos to Tucker Carlson. I think he's done a fantastic job of going over there and having this conversation with Putin. But I really genuinely think there are a lot of questions that he should have asked and he didn't. I'm a little disappointed with him, but ultimately, this is an incredibly iconic interview, and who knows, there may be more in the future. Maybe not with Tucker Carlson, maybe with Tucker Carlson. I definitely would like more questions, and he didn't ask the question, can anybody else run Russia other than you, which I'm a bit disappointed at, because I think that's quite a, is it a dictatorship? I mean, it certainly looks like one to me, but yeah, it's a really, really interesting interview. I hope you've got as much out of it as I have. I've learned an awful lot. It's opened up a whole barrel of questions and it's expanded my knowledge exponentially. I know so much more about Russia and Crimea and Ukraine than I ever did before. And kudos to Tucker Carlson for doing this interview and making that happen.
Да, было бы смешно, если бы не было так грустно.
This endless mobilization in Ukraine, the hysteria, the domestic problems, sooner or later it will result in agreement.
Истерика там, внутренние проблемы.
You know, this probably sounds strange given the current situation.
Все равно мы договоримся. И
But the relations between the two peoples will be rebuilt anyway.
в сегодняшней ситуации прозвучит.
It will take a lot of time, but they will heal.
Между народами восстановится. Потребуется много времени.
I'll give you very unusual examples.
Совсем приведу вам необычный пример.
There is a combat encounter on the battlefield. Here's a specific example. Ukrainian soldiers got encircled. This is an example from real life. Our soldiers were shouting to them, "There is no chance. Surrender yourselves. Come out and you will be alive." Suddenly, the Ukrainian soldiers were screaming from.
Question is, do you believe them? So there's a whole other facet here, isn't there, where Russian soldiers have been seen to do horrific things that no military organization should be allowed to do. So there's always that trust problem. If Russians are saying to you, "Come out, you'll be fine," yeah, don't necessarily trust them.
There in Russian, perfect Russian, saying, "Russians do not surrender," and all of them perished. They still identify themselves.
Wow. I totally get where he's coming from. That's a really powerful statement, actually, but yeah.
As Russian.
Again, he's underpinning the fact that, fundamentally, Ukrainians are, at least in part, Russian and have been for hundreds of years. They think Russian, they speak Russian, they write Russian. In essence, they are Russian. I think that's basically where he's coming from. But there are Ukrainians who don't want to be Russian anymore, or at least don't want to be controlled by Russia. I think that's the argument here, isn't it? That's the counter argument, is Ukrainians want to be Ukrainian. But with a third of Ukraine being actually Russian, it's like I was speaking to the wife the other day about this, and it's like Ukraine, in my opinion, over the many years of so many people trying to get control of it, um, it's like a soup pot. It's like a mixed bowl of soup of all different nationalities, all stacked together with no completely unifying, centralized element that keeps them as one. And maybe they're trying to create that. Maybe they've been trying to create that. And maybe if America hadn't intervened, none of this would have happened.
What is happening is, to a certain extent, an element of a civil war. Everyone in the West thinks that the Russian people have been split by hostilities forever. No, they will be reunited. The unity is still there. Why are the Ukrainian authorities dismantling the Ukrainian Orthodox Church? Because it brings together not only the territory, it brings together our souls. No one will be able to
There's a joke there, but I won't
separate the soul. Shall we end here, or is there anything else?
No, I think that's great. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, that was impressive. That was impressive. That he just managed to get that together and do that. Kudos to Tucker Carlson. I think what a fantastic reporter, journalist he is. Kudos to him, really. All power to him. He'll go down in history for that one. That's exceptionally good. But there's so many questions that I wish he had have asked that he didn't ask, and some things I think he could have pushed back on that he didn't push back on. But just to top it off, the difference between Nagaman Chatty's interviewing technique and this interviewing technique, I much prefer letting the person you're interviewing speak. And I hate interviewers who just ask the same question. They interrupt you and they ask you the same question. Not the same question in a different way, not trying to be clever and get around the question or get around the answer, but literally she just repeated the same question over and over and over again. Basically, until you say what I want you to say, I'm just going to keep asking you the same question. And for me, that's a European Union way of doing things, and I really, really don't like it. And you could argue that's a Russian way of doing things. But certainly my opinion of Putin has changed. My opinion of NATO has dramatically changed. And my understanding of the conflict in Ukraine has just blown up out of proportion. I've learned so much just because of this interview. So kudos to Tucker Carlson. I think, whilst the interview didn't necessarily answer all questions or prove anything definitively in any particular way, I think it most definitely will allow people to gain a better understanding of what's actually going on in Ukraine. Because honestly, other than what the BBC have been telling me, I knew pretty much nothing, and I've learned so much in the last couple of days. So thank you, Tucker Carlson. And equally, Tucker Carlson's entourage, or he himself, I've no idea. Obviously, this video was flagged up because I'm using his interview. But I argued my case. I said, look, I'm not trying to steal your political right, your rights or anything. I am analyzing your interviewing technique and just trying to analyze the situation. And I'm above all else appreciative to Tucker Carlson for having created this interview, and they have given me permission to use it on the channel, which is great, because literally, we're nobody, we're a nothing channel. We have no followers, we have 3 videos up, and it's just me speaking my mind at this point in time. And these videos are very, very long. So, yeah, hugely appreciate it on many levels. As I mentioned, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. That's absolutely not my intention. I am just sharing with you my thoughts on the situation and my reasoning behind it, the evidence that I have seen. And I would love it if you would do the same. If you think I'm wrong, by all means tell me. Don't start calling me a Nazi and things like that, because I'll just ban you, because that is not proper debate. That's you just being a wokest lunatic, and I won't stand for it. So thank you for watching. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and do comment, because that's the whole point of this channel, is to get a bit of discourse going. I think I'm going to have to create a smaller version of this video and sort of collate everything that I've learnt as a off the back of it. But it was just so interesting. There was so much information that I feel it's important to upload the whole thing and just have it there as well. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again soon. I am politically motivated. I hope you are too. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.